Paul Davis. We're not a name you need to know all the time. Water, fire, and storms cause serious property damage. When it happens to you, it's no time for second best. That's why insurance professionals have been trusting Paul Davis for over 50 years. The journey back requires skill, urgency, and experience. That's Paul Davis. People serving people. When it happens, call Paul Davis, because this is no time for second best.
Good evening, everyone. I hope that everybody is doing well. Welcome to our next CCI Eastern Ontario webinar, our first virtual beer seminar. For those of you who can remember all the way back to January 2020, which is I think now, 5 years ago, this session originally scheduled to be held at the Mill Street Brewery, where real live beer would have been available, but unfortunately it was canceled due to a raging blizzard. So hopefully everybody has a beer, wine, beverage, bubbly, whatever your drink of choice is this evening in hand. The seminar was rebooked for March, then COVID-19 happened. So we rebooked it again for April 16th, and then beer was supplanted by our local COVID-19 superheroes. But it looks like fourth time is a charm, and here we are back to beer or wine or bubblies. And cheers to tonight's session. There are no stupid questions, but there is beer, albeit virtually. I am Nancy Hull, one of the 9 directors and president of CCI Eastern Ontario, a condo lawyer, and your moderator for this session. The Canadian Condominium Institute is an independent, nonprofit organization formed in 1982 with chapters across the country and 8 in Ontario alone. Our main objective is education. We seek to help all those involved in condos, from owners to directors to professionals, and we encourage all those stakeholders to work together. Since we've been living with the reality of COVID-19 for over 6 weeks now, we wanted to try throwing a bit of normalcy into the mix. So tonight's session is not about COVID-19, although we may have some time for a few COVID-19 questions at the end. Instead, tonight's session focuses on other condo intrigues, and we have 3 fabulous women lined up to educate us and answer our questions. Tonight, we're going to hear from Eileen Boles, Shelley Glover, and Stephanie Robinson. I'm not going to give you any more details from that, as I will introduce them all briefly before each session. Again, a great big thank you to our sponsor, Paul Davis, who we heard from at the very beginning of our session. A few brief reminders before we welcome our first speaker. We are recording this webinar and it will be available on our website. We will be taking questions throughout the entire presentation and hopefully at the end of the session as well. After all 3 speakers are finished speaking, we will then have time to go through those questions. So throughout the presentations, if you have a question, throw it in the Q&A or throw it in the chat. And our fabulous moderators, Justin Tudor and Mike, are going to help gather those questions and bring them forth at the end of our session. If we don't get to your questions, hopefully, perhaps we'll have another opportunity with these fabulous women another time. The information you're being provided today is general information, and since things are changing fast and what you do in your specific situation is fact-specific, apologies, it's very important that and more now so than ever, that condos rely on the various professionals for advice in these challenging times. If you're a director and want to use the protection of Section 37 of the Act, you need to get an opinion about your specific fact situation from your professionals. This webinar and the answers in the Q&A are not intended to provide you with opinions that would protect you under Section 37 of the Act. In addition, the information provided in this webinar is current as of today's date, and as things are rapidly changing, the information provided today may or may not be relevant or applicable at a future date. So let's jump right in to the meat of our topics and introduce our first speaker, Eileen Boles. Eileen Boles joined Condominium Management Group team in 2001. Her career in the condominium industry began in 2006, starting in administration and then moving on to condominium property management in 2007. Eileen is a graduate of St. Thomas University, the Ontario Real Estate College, and has completed her requirements for the Registered Condominium Manager, RCM designation in 2015. Providing further proof of her dedication to the condominium management profession, her clients, and their condominiums. She has built a trusting working relationship with all of her condominium board of directors and owners and truly enjoys her job. So Eileen, I will welcome you again. Thank you so much for taking time out from your, I'm sure, exceptionally busy time right now to speak with us here this evening. And I turn it over to you to tell us all about increased premiums, deductibles, the impact on budgeting, everything else we need to know about insurance.
Perfect. Thanks, Nancy. Cheers to everyone out there. I can't tell you what's in this glass, but it might give you a hint. So I've been invited today to speak to you about insurance premiums and deductibles and the recent impact they're having on condominium budgets and what this impact may mean for your condominium. So move on to the next slide here. So what is happening with your insurance premiums and deductibles? Many Ontario condominiums have seen huge increases in insurance premiums and deductibles in recent renewals. The cost of insuring condo buildings is rapidly increasing in Canada over the past year to 2 years, and Ontario rates and deductibles have skyrocketed over this time. You've probably seen this on the news over the last few months. Other provinces are seeing rate increases too, with rate increases reported in BC and Alberta, seeing huge jumps in their premiums being reported between 300 to 500% in some cases. One extreme example we've seen in a condo right here in Ottawa is their insurance premiums rising by over 700%. Ouch. So some condominium corporations are even having trouble obtaining insurance. They're finding it hard to get the insurance, and some policies are even being canceled because of the risk and because of their history. We're going to move on and we're going to talk about what does the condo insurance, why does the condo insurance keep increasing in Canada? Conditions specific to condo corporations make them potentially riskier to insurers. Water damages is one of the biggest sources of property insurance loss for condominium corporations. Toilets overflow, sinks back up, washers, dishwasher connections become loose or back up. Pipes that burst. And because also of the concentration of the number of people in these buildings, condos have a notoriously high frequency of claims. Insurance companies are a business, as we know, they're in business to make a profit. More claims mean more payouts for these insurers. And some insurers have not found it profitable to provide condo insurance. And the result is that some insurers are discontinuing coverage, meaning the remaining insurers that are in the market, there's fewer now, are charging higher premiums. Over the last few years, property losses in general, as a result of extreme weather events, have wreaked havoc on the insurance companies' profits and their losses across the globe. And we've had Fort McMurray, we've had flooding in Ottawa, you name it. And according to the Insurance Bureau of Canada, there was $1.9 billion in losses in Canada in 2018. That's quadrupled in the last 9 years. All properties will see increases in their premiums when property damages in general exceed their loss ratios. Reporting means increased chance of premium increases. So weigh carefully, big advice, weigh carefully what claims you submit, and we'll talk a bit more about that. The total insured values of some very large condominiums mean that multiple insurance companies must share the risk, which is leading to increased premiums as well. The lack of supply coupled with the increasing demand is driving premiums up right now. And then we also have, because of all these events and repairs, we have a shortage of skilled laborers across the country, which is pushing up the cost of the reconstruction projects. Material costs are rising, further raising the payouts insurers are on the hook for. So if they're not making money, they have to make money somehow, and they're increasing premiums or your deductibles right now. So for all these, condominiums are becoming a much higher risk due to their loss and the severity of claims. And as a result of this, insurance companies are being more cautious when applying premiums. They're taking a careful look at what their risks are right now. So what does that mean for impact on your budgets? First, increased insurance premiums. Not only will you have already seen, or will you start to see soon, increases to your premiums, but you're also going to start to need to plan and budget for those increases and repairs. As mentioned just a second ago, in Ottawa, managers and boards are seeing a majority of condos, whether they're high-rise or townhouses, having significant increases. I've personally seen a condo have their insurance premiums increased by 56% in a 2-year period. And what this has meant for them was that 64% of their condo fee increase for those 2 years was due to insurance. Your next impact on your budgeting is your increased deductibles. So not only premiums, but the deductibles. So increased deductibles are a way for your insurance companies to keep the number of reported claims lower. Remember, like we said, insurance companies do need to make money. And if you have a large claim history in the past with your condo, you are at risk of higher deductibles. And because of these increases, some condominiums have opted to increase their deductibles in order to manage their keep their premiums manageable. Additionally, looking at deductibles, your board should review the declaration and your bylaws. How are we going to offset this? Who pays for it? Your declaration, your bylaws will give you a clue to that. Have a look at them, have your legal counsel do that as well for you. They can be big help for you. So you can determine what provisions apply regarding your deductible recovery. Many bylaws include a full recovery of your deductible from unit owners, except with regards to acts of error or omission. So I'll give an example of that. What you want to look at is section 5 of your declaration, which talks about your maintenance and repairs. And some declarations will state that owners are obligated to maintain their units and repair or replace the components upon failure from normal wear and tear, or where the components are at the end of their life cycle. So if something failed early because of poor original installation, rather than a failure on the owner's part of repairing or maintaining that, then that deductible may be the corporation's obligation to pay. Look at your bylaws. What does it say? Does it say that the owner can be held responsible for this insurable loss if the damage resulted from an act or omission by the owner or its occupant? Condominiums need to be prepared to cover the cost and the deductible if not failure to maintain or an act or omission cause that event. So boards need to really carefully review each declaration and bylaw to see how that will impact their budgeting for not just your premiums, but your deductibles, okay? Look at what your claim history is. What is the risk of the losses in a given year? You may need to budget for more than one deductible. On average, how many losses do you have? Hopefully not many, but in some cases that does happen. So you need to look at what your history is, and you need to budget for that. Set it aside. Don't spend it if you don't use it in that year. Think of it as basically a reserve fund for your deductible in case you need it. You don't want to have to ask owners to pay for something that that may not happen. I totally get that. It's a tough one to budget for, but it's a prudent thing to do to be prepared for this. In the event that it occurs, you need that money, or maybe two. You don't want to have to go back to your owners for a special assessment. Nobody likes that word. Okay, so your next one is your third impact that I'm just going to touch on is the increased repair expenses. With increased deductibles, particularly water claims, condos will not be submitting as many claims and will need to cover the expenses themselves. I'll try to explain that one a little bit. Say you have a water leak that occurs in a unit, and that cost for the restoration work to that unit is about $35,000. And let's say your deductible is $25,000. And in this instance, the owner would be responsible for the damages to the unit, the repair, up to the deductible cost, obviously, or whichever is less. Would the condo make a claim for $10,000? You can, but you would want to weigh what impact a $10,000 claim would have on your insurance. Generally, it's recommended that a claim not be made unless your loss payout is similar to the deductible amount. So in this one, I wouldn't recommend it, but it's all particular to your individual circumstances. So would you make a claim for $10,000? So keep in mind that when you're submitting more claims, you're increasing your risk assessment with the insurer and potentially further increasing your premiums and deductibles. So who would pay here? In that instance, the owner would be responsible for that $25,000 repairs or up to the deductible amount, and then the condo would pay the remaining balance. So be prepared for that instance. Finally, what does this all mean? That means all of these items of increased premiums, deductibles, and repair expenses means increased condo fees, unfortunately, in some instances. So if we move along here, next one is insurance. This in this event, with regards to insurance, this event obviously can't be predicted to happen, but you need to make, as I said, you need to make contingencies for it. Do you have a contingency for just one, or do you need it for others? These are questions to ask. We don't have a crystal ball to budget for these, to know when these are going to happen. And none of us want to increase condo fees more than we need to, that's for sure. So it is very, I'll stress, it is very prudent and advisable to budget for instances like this. If you may have money in the bank for, let's say, one or two events, but what do you do after that? So definitely speak with your auditor, speak with your manager on how you would budget for this in the event that something like this could happen. So what can you do? What for the impacts on your condo and its budgets? You need to weigh your risks. The condo needs to weigh what number that may be, what your risk may be for you. Look at your history of claims. Look at your history of water losses, those sorts of things. Weigh what risk your condo's at for insurable losses and what money you may need to cover those losses. I would speak with your insurance broker. They're a wealth of information, they really are. They have a history of your losses, they have a history of your policy, they have a history of your costs and the potential increases in the market. They can tell you what's happening about the insurance market at your budget time to guide you with your budgeting. And they can also tell you if what impact your rate increases and deductible increases, if you want to offset increased deductibles against your premiums. So next thing is budget for those increased premiums, deductibles, and repairs. Condos need to strongly consider budgeting, not only for the increased premiums and deductibles that we mentioned in the previous slide, but also the repairs that may need to be made in the instances where the condominium corporation would be responsible. Like I mentioned earlier on the water loss. Take proactive measures. That's kind of a big one, is what can be done in this instance. So I would strongly encourage condominiums in the meantime to put in place proactive measures to reduce the risk of insurable events, regular inspections, to ensure that proper maintenance of water pipes and appliances is being done, install water leak alarms next to washers or water heaters. They make a god-awful sound when water leaks out, but it'll wake you up in the middle of the night. You can also install them in your boiler rooms. So take those sorts of proactive measures. Review or pass a standard unit bylaw. It'll define the components of the units for which the condo corporation is responsible for to insure. so that items such as flooring and countertops are no longer the responsibility of the condo corporation to insure. And the purpose of removing them from the condo's insurance is not to pass the buck to the owners, but merely it mitigates the collective risk of unit owners and the common expense increases. So implementing some of these items is going to be less expensive to implement, one or a few of these things than in some instances, one or two losses. Shelley's going to speak a bit more about how we can mitigate losses in her presentation, but that's all I have on that one.
Fantastic, Eileen. There's a lot to chew on there and a lot of really practical advice and really practical tips, which is exceptionally helpful for all of our directors, our managers, and our board members, all of our attendees. What we'll do is we'll thank you for now for the initial presentation, and of course we'll bring you back in a little while for our Q&A. And just a reminder to all of our participants, for those who may not be familiar with Zoom and how it works, if you just scroll your mouse over along the bottom, you'll see the chat function and the Q&A function, and you can put your questions in either the chat or the Q&A, and our hosts will gather them up for any of our panelists at the end. And then, of course, any other questions that come to mind, including what kind of wine we're sharing this evening. Just teasing, of course. Although I can share that, absolutely, it's a Pinot Grigio. So turning now to our next fabulous presenter, we have Shelley Glover. Shelley is a chartered insurance professional who has worked in the insurance industry, since 1989. And you're given your age there, away a little bit there, Shelley.
Oops.
You look way younger than that. She has been employed in various claim positions in the insurance industry, working both for insurance companies and 2 national independent adjusting companies. Shelley is licensed in all lines of claims. She is currently the branch manager of the Ottawa and Pembroke offices of Claims Pro Inc. And she has specialized in condominium claims for approximately 15 years, adjusting mostly on behalf of the insurers for condominium corporations. She's also well versed in the claims process relating to unit owner policies, and Shelley has presented many seminars over the years relating to condo insurance to her peers in the insurance industry, local condominium corporations, and as well for us, CCI, we are continuing to be grateful. Yeah, Shelley is also past president of the Ottawa Valley Adjusters Association. So Shelley, I'm going to turn it over to you to take it away on insurance claims, causes, and mitigation.
Thank you, Nancy. Wow, that was a lot of words. I didn't realize it was quite that big. Thank you very much to CCI Eastern Ontario chapter for having me present tonight. My presentation is going to actually tie very well in with Eileen's.
We lost Shelley's video and we lost Shelley's video or sound.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can hear you and we can see you. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so my presentation is going to tie in very well with what Eileen just talked to you about. With insurance obviously being very topical with respect to the condo world in the last year or so, I thought maybe it would be a good opportunity from an insurance adjuster's side of things, who deals mostly with condo corporation claims, is that we talk about some of the more common claims that we see, the causes, and maybe provide some insight into some possible mitigation efforts that could be incorporated by boards and property managers in educating the owners. And you're never going to eliminate all the claims, but maybe help to mitigate or minimize, so you don't need to involve the master policy. So the first we're going to focus on is property losses. Fires, although not the most common, Eileen was right when she said water is the big one. Fires are the most costly with respect to the amount of damage they cause, and ultimately the insurer has to pay out. So just kind of going through my memory over the last little bit, probably the 2 most familiar types of fires we see are kitchen cooking fires and exterior fires. So kitchen cooking fires, again, you're never going to prevent them entirely. They're accidental in nature. Nobody intentionally leaves their, pot of grease on the stove at 3 a.m. and, walks away into the next room and falls asleep. However, there are probably ways that you can at least minimize the damage. So, and again, I should put this caveat in, these suggestions I'm making, I don't know, from a legal perspective, what a condo corporation can force an owner to do. So these are merely suggestions that I'm putting forward that maybe Nancy or Eileen could comment on afterwards with respect to what you can actually do from a board perspective. Recommend that all owners have fire extinguishers in their kitchen. I mean, I think that's a pretty common recommendation across the board, especially by our fire departments. But what that's going to do is, again, help minimize the damage. Two things that we tend to see with cooking fires is, the owner panics, doesn't know what to do, grabs their phone, their keys, their family, their pets, hits the front door, and calls the fire department. So in the meantime, the fire is still burning in the house. Obviously, the damage is becoming more extensive, both from the fire and the resulting smoke. If you had a fire extinguisher on hand, you'd have the confidence to stand back, blast it, and put it down. The other thing we see happen is, again, people just react. They grab water. One of the worst things you can do when you have a grease fire. Again, not only from a damage perspective, but from an injury perspective. So fire extinguishers in the kitchen, again, you're never going to eliminate it from happening, but at least you're going to mitigate and minimize it. The biggest one is exterior fires. So these are fires that occur on balconies or back patios. And again, it's not always proven, because it is sometimes very difficult for us to prove what causes a fire, simply because the damage destroys the evidence. But a lot of times, from getting statements or from just ruling out other things, a lot of the time it's because of improperly extinguished smoking materials in planters. So I'm sure everybody knows that when you buy your planters from Lowe's or Loblaws or whatever, in the soil there's some kind of a peat moss mixture, which is very flammable. So what happens is people, they're out having their cigarette, or they're having a few people over, and somebody puts their cigarette out in a planter. It looks out, there's no smoke coming from it. Off they go into the house. And in the meantime, what's happening is that peat moss in the soil mixture is heating up, and it starts to continue to heat up, and then all of a sudden you have flame. Because it's outside, A, there's usually nobody out there that's actually seeing that happen, and B, you've got the weather elements that come into play. So what happens is, maybe there's a breeze or a strong wind. Next thing you know, you've got flames going up the siding or catching onto the wooden deck. It continues up, even if it's a townhouse style or a multi-unit stack style. All of a sudden now you've got extensive damage going on the outside. Then next thing you know, it jumps into the roof, and now we got a bigger problem. So what can happen is, you've got multiple units impacted. You've also got a lot of resultant water damage from the fire extinguishing services from the fire department. So again, sometimes something maybe that you could educate your owners about. Not everybody is necessarily aware of that concern. Next slide. Okay, so the big one, like Eileen commented on, is water. Super common, most frequent claims that we see. And so what I tried to do was narrow it down to kind of the most common causes that we see, and maybe some suggestions that you can put forward to your unit owners. DIY plumbing, never a good idea. I shouldn't say that. I guess there are some people out there that aren't necessarily licensed plumbers, but are familiar enough with trades that they can do the work themselves. We've seen a lot of losses where somebody thought they'd install their own supply line or whatever the case may be, and that lets go, and next thing you know, their unit and the unit below them are flooded out. Two reasons. That's the first reason that we would recommend always using a professional. Second reason is, if you're using a professional plumber, for example, chances are they've got liability insurance. So not saying that you know, necessarily every time they do an installation, it's going to be perfect and it's never going to fail. But if it does, it can give the corporation or the insurance company a line of recourse to recoup any lost payout. Quality plumbing fixtures and fittings. Again, that kind of speaks for itself. You get what you pay for. Yeah, you might have saved $20 or $50, but when it lets go after a year, you know, again, that $50 is now being spent times multiples on damages. Hot water tanks, they're a little bit trickier in two cents. Most people, or the majority, are rented tanks. So hot water tanks, you know, they don't have a set life expectancy. You know, we see some fail as early as 10 years, but, you know, on average, say 12 to 15 years is kind of that expected lifespan. The problem is when you have a rented tank, you're under contract with the utility provider, and you're not necessarily able to pick up the phone and say, you know, hey, this tank's 13 years old, I want you to come and replace it. So it's important that owners who do have rented tanks, you know, read their contracts and see what their options are with respect to enforcing a replacement when a tank gets aged or into that age bracket. Same with owned tanks. You know, owners aren't necessarily going to be, you know, super excited to go out and have to replace their tank simply because their corporation tells them that they should, because it's 12 or 13 years old. They're not cheap. So, you know, maybe there's some kind of a visual inspection program that, you know, you could implement maybe biannually, you know, to have the owners, you know, or bring somebody in to check the tank, see if there's any signs of wear, any evidence of any, you know, minor leakage, where you could jump on it ahead of time. There's also some systems that you can apply, or drain pans underneath it, where if, you know, it does start to leak, it goes into the pan, which goes down into the drain. They're not always 100% foolproof, but there's different things that you can do to again, mitigate or minimize that damage. Freezing. This one is, of course, only applicable in the winter months, but again, something that we see a lot. Educating your owners on requirements or recommendations when they're leaving in the winter, either for, you know, a 1 week or a 2 week holiday, or, you know, if they're a snowbird and they're going away for 3 or 4 months. The important thing to remember here is that a lot of owners' policies actually dictate that there's certain things that they have to do in order to have coverage should a loss occur as a result of a frozen pipe. So not only is it in the corporation's interest to educate the owners so that the master policy doesn't get triggered, but it's also important for an owner to ensure that they would have coverage if something was to happen. Sorry, just to touch base on that, a couple of things that you can suggest that they do, or this is what the policies dictate: have someone attend on a regular basis or a daily basis, just to make sure that the heat's being maintained. Make sure owners don't turn down their heat, which, you know, is a tendency because they're not going to be there. They might save a few dollars on their utility bill. The best mitigation factor is drain your lines, turn off your water, then you don't have to worry about it. Yeah, so getting into some of the less prevalent ones, but again, ones that, you know, can still cause a fair bit of damage. Again, winter related, and specifically in Ottawa, due to the nature of the winters that we tend to experience, freeze and thaw cycles can cause ice damming. So, you know, keeping an eye on snow built up on roofs to prevent ice damming. If your building happens to be susceptible to it because of the design or the roof lines, you might want to speak to a roofer or an engineer, maybe get some suggestions on some preventative measures. So again, to help mitigate against those claims. Wearable plumbing components. I think Eileen kind of touched on this a little bit. There's certain things that, you know, will wear over time and they should be checked and replaced. The wax toilet seals is a good one, supply lines, etc. Exterior taps, you know, the importance of making sure they're drained and winterized properly, you know, come the fall, both for unit owners that have them on their own property, as well as for any that that might be in the common element areas to help maintain the gardens. Lastly, again, this is one that we see in the summer, you know, when everybody's starting to use their AC again, just to make sure their condensate lines don't have any blockages, because what will happen is that'll cause the water to back up and you know, end up on your under your window if you have a window unit, or even with your central systems. Okay, so moving on to liability claims. I just focused on this particular type of claim because it is, again, the most prevalent that we see, and probably one that you can mitigate against by following some tips here. Slips / trips and falls. So these are, you know, when somebody slips and slides on the sidewalk outside the building, or you know, trips over a pothole in the parking lot. So more so with respect to slips and falls and winter maintenance, just a few suggestions here that if your corporation tenders out your snow maintenance, and what you should make sure that is contained within your contract with them. Hold harmless agreements. So that's a clause that stipulates that the snow removal contractor will hold harmless the condo corporation, and will take on claims that are put forward as a result of failure to maintain during winter conditions. The corporation is a named insured on their liability policy. What that does is it doesn't necessarily negate you from exposure, but it puts forward that the insurer for the snow removal contractor has to provide you with a defense. Important that your contracts explicitly list what duties you are retaining that contractor for. So are they simply there to just plow? Are they salting? Are they sanding? What areas specifically on the grounds are they responsible to address? Are they just doing the parking lots? Are they doing all the sidewalks? Are they dealing with the walk-ups to the individual units? Or is that maybe an area that the owner should be maintaining, or has to maintain as per the declarations? And when? So a lot of them say after 5 centimeters of snow. So make sure that that's all outlined in the contract. The other important thing, and again, this is more from a defense perspective, is that you insist that they maintain logs. And basically what the logs are is that every time they attend your property, they record, you know, the date, the time, what the weather conditions were, and what specific duty they performed. So again, the insurance companies like to have these when they're providing or putting forward a defense to show that, hey, you know, look, this, you know, our contractor was on site, you know, every day, and, you know, we've done our best to mitigate against these types of slips and falls. Similar, if you've got your own staff, a superintendent or somebody that does snow maintenance at your building or on your property, have them maintain a log. Again, it's a good defense mechanism. The importance of ensuring that any potential hazards that you're made aware of are addressed quickly. So if somebody reports that there's a pothole, again, especially this time of the year, that, you know, it either gets fixed properly, or at least that you put something over top of it, a pylon, something to make sure that you're making anybody coming onto your property aware that there's that particular hazard. Loose paver stones, again, after the winter melt, you know, they tend to shift, and there could be a corner up that could pose as a tripping hazard. And basically the way to identify these types of things are just to make sure that, you know, you or your staff or somebody that you hire does a regular review of your grounds. Next slide. So basically, just as an overview, education is key. Again, you know, depending on the specifics in your particular complex, you might have a lot of first-time homeowners. They might not be aware of a lot of this stuff that they should be, you know, keeping an eye out for or doing. A suggestion that I have, and I do it for my own staff, is hosting, contacting some of your vendors, whether you get, your engineering firm, your plumber, and maybe doing some educational seminars for your owners. They can sometimes be more effective than, just sending out emails or posting notices in elevators. The key to minimizing water loss is quick response. Some things that we've seen in the past is where a pipe lets go. Unfortunately, owner has no clue where the shutoff valve is, or the superintendent, has no idea where the shutoff is for that particular run. So just to make sure that, owners and supers educate themselves on where those shutoff mechanisms are, because again, it'll stop the amount of damage. The other thing is if you do have a water loss, and this kind of ties in with our sponsor, make sure that you use contractors who are trained and certified in water damage mitigation, and that they have access to drying equipment. A lot of the times, what can happen is that they'll come in, they'll remove the water, they'll put in the drying equipment, and they can actually save on the repairs afterwards. So your front end costs might be a little bit higher, but the amount of repairs and the disruption to the unit or to the common elements area will be minimized on the back end. Encourage owners to act on leaks and water damage right away. We've seen it in the past where, by the time we get called in, there's evidence that this thing's been, happening off and on for, how many months, which could affect coverage, insurance coverage, or it may bring in a mold issue, which again might cause a coverage issue, or just overall might cause a bigger claim that if somebody had reacted or reported right away, might have cost a few $100s, and that would have been the end of it. Overall, I think the important thing is to remember that any loss affects all the owners. So even though it might not be happening in your unit, that claim or that incident that may trigger the corp's insurance policy could down the road, be the cause of a potential premium increase or a larger deductible, which Eileen spoke about, which can be difficult for you to budget for. So overall, basically knowledge and mitigation is key to avoiding those claims and hopefully avoiding having to use the corporation's insurance policy. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Shelley. Again, there was a huge amount of practical tips in there, and we are going to be doing everything we can afterwards to get these presentations up on our website quickly, because there's a lot of things to remember and a lot of things to take away from these presentations. So again, thank you so much, Shelley, and of course, stick around. We've got some questions that are coming in for our panelists, and we also have just some general Q&A, which is again what the session is all about. So throw those questions out, stay tuned, and we'll get to those questions at the end. Our next speaker, we're very excited to have as well, Stephanie Robinson. Hi, Stephanie. Stephanie is the manager for the Building Sciences team of WSP Canada Inc. in Ottawa, Ontario. She has over 12 years of experience in investigation, design, contract administration, and construction review of building envelope components for new and existing construction in both Canada and the US. Building envelope, lots of problems there, eh, Stephanie? Stephanie leads technical decisions for roofing and cladding projects across Canada and manages WSP's Roofing Centre of Excellence, a national team that connects the roofing business across all geographies and supports our teams by sharing knowledge, managing internal company processes and documents, and promoting industry reputation. She's a level 2 certified thermographer and specializes in application of infrared technology for the diagnosis of heat loss and moisture ingress through the building enclosure. Stephanie has served on the board for Building Envelope Council Ottawa Region, BACOR, and currently serves as the Vice President of the International Institute of Building Enclosure Consultants for the Southern Ontario chapter. Welcome, Stephanie. I'm very excited to hear about fixing leaks and how a little tiny bit of homework can save the board time and money, and I'm sure our attendees are too, so I turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Nancy, and thanks to the Board of CCI for having me today. So leakage is something that I wanted to talk about today because we're getting into the warmer weather. Someone knock on wood there for me. And this is typically the time of year that we start seeing water come into our building and cause all kinds of problems, which my previous two panel colleagues started to talk about a little bit. The analogy with leakage in buildings that I used to like to use to kind of explain the complexity is, think about if you were to visit your family doctor, and if you were to go walk into his office one day and he asks you, you know, what seems to be the problem today? And you say, well, doctor, I hurt. And he says, well, what do you mean you hurt? And that's all the information you were to give him. He or she would start to ask you questions to try to understand why you hurt, where you hurt, under what circumstances that you hurt. But if you don't give them any of that information, then it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of grueling, expensive tests to figure out what might possibly be the issue with this pain you're experiencing. So if we move into the building envelope, and I'll just mention that the building envelope typically includes the exterior walls, windows, roof of the building. So everything that keeps the outside out and the inside in. Next slide, please. So when we talk about diagnosing leakage through the building envelope, it's very similar to that analogy with the doctor. If you were to call me as the building envelope consultant up one day and to simply say, my building leaks, and you don't have any further information than that, it could take me a lot of time and a lot of your hard-earned money to figure out why that leak is occurring. So with a little bit of homework before you give me a call, I can help you to save time and money in solving this leakage problem. Next slide, please. So let's talk about how we do that. The first thing to understand is that there's generally 3 types of leakage that I tend to see when people give me a call. One is water ingress, and this could be rain, snow melt, drainage runoff coming in through a foundation wall. This is water that Mother Nature is providing to the exterior environment that is somehow getting into your building. The second type of leakage that I see has to do with air leakage, where there's humid air on the inside of your building that is typically trying to get to the outside because there's an air pressure difference between the interior and the exterior. And through that journey, it hits a cold surface somewhere and condenses and creates liquid water or moisture in your wall assembly. And that could show up in a very obvious condition, such as ice or water forming on a cold window surface, or it could show up in a concealed condition within your wall. And that's where it really starts to cause problems with growing yucky stuff in the wall, or accelerated deterioration of components that you can't necessarily see. The third type of leakage is mechanical leakage. This has to do with equipment or piping that might be malfunctioning and doesn't necessarily have a lot to do with the building envelope. Next slide, please. So considering those 3 types of leakage, let's talk about how you can help me to help you save money and time. There's a few things to do, and I'm going to kind of go in reverse order according to those type of leakage that I talked about. We're going to start with the mechanical equipment, and mainly I'm starting here because this is not my specialty or area of expertise. And you can very often quickly rule out having to call a building envelope consultant like myself if you can attribute the leakage to some sort of mechanical failure. So there's a couple of questions that you can ask yourself, or that your superintendent or property manager can ask about the nature of your leakage. Are there any pipes located nearby? If so, are you able to visually inspect those pipes and see, is there any staining on the joints or the insulation around those pipes that might indicate that that's the source of the leakage? Is a leak occurring below a mechanical room or a janitor's closet or some other source of water that you could go physically review and check that there isn't water somewhere on a floor that isn't meant to see water? You know, if you call me, I can certainly do that work for you and help to check those types of sources. But once I attribute it to a mechanical issue, then I'm going to turn you over to your plumber or your mechanical equipment service supplier, and I can't be much help in the repair. So for the little bit of work in popping a ceiling tile or visiting these kinds of mechanical spaces, it might be able to better direct you as to who you should be calling next to actually fix the problem. The next few items are the equivalent. We're talking about either air leakage or moisture ingress according to something outside coming into your building. And I'm going to give you some tips and tricks, which would be the equivalent of your doctor asking you how and where and under what circumstances you hurt. First of all, think about the location. When you're calling up your consultant and trying to describe the area of leakage to them, please try to be specific about the location of the leakage. When I come to site after the leak has happened, there won't always necessarily be a stain or some other physical evidence that I can use to pinpoint the area that you were seeing the water. So try to be as specific as you can. One great tip is to mark the location of the leak with a piece of painter's tape or a sticky note or something else to be able to physically mark where you were actually seeing the water come in. And like I was saying, try to be as specific as possible. A window leak could have dozens of causes. So if you can narrow it down to whether you saw water at the head or the sill of the window and the window in which room, all of those things can really help me. Similar to a roof or a wall leak, if you can narrow down the location of the wall or roof leak, then I can start to map that out according to details on the exterior of your building and help to narrow down the potential sources of that leakage. Next, think about the conditions under which you're seeing the leakage and try to record those as accurately as you can. Does it leak when it's raining? Does it leak every time it's raining, or only when there is high winds, or only when it rains really, really hard? Does it leak immediately after it rains, or does it take a couple of hours or days even after a rain event for you to see that water inside of your building? If the leakage is occurring in parallel with spring snow melt, is it happening only during the winter when you're seeing freeze-thaw cycles, or is it only happening during the spring when all of the snow starts to melt? Generally, just try to keep in mind how often does it leak and when was the last time that you saw it leak. Also be forthcoming with the history of the leakage and the history of potential repairs with your consultants. Sometimes people are tempted to withhold previous information or previous reports about previous repairs because you want your new consultant to draw their own conclusions about the problem. And that's a valid concern, but I can assure you that as a professional, I am going to draw my own conclusions about your specific problem. And reviewing the history of repairs or previous investigations that I've done can help me to lead to a more effective and a more targeted investigation plan. I can review the reports or the observations of my predecessors and determine fairly quickly whether whether I can rely on the information and move on to an alternate means of testing and investigation, or whether I should redo some of that work for a variety of reasons. Next slide. So in summary, you want to keep a couple of things in mind when you're talking to your consultants. Try to be as accurate as possible. Try to be as specific as possible with the information that you're providing. Clearly communicate this, and there's a lot of things that can help. Often, especially if it's a really stubborn or complicated leak that we're having issues with identifying the source, sometimes I will get the building owner to take a picture of that leakage location and then print it off and circle right on the photo where you see the water coming in the next time you see it leak. and keeping a little log of every time you see it leak and what the environmental conditions were when you saw that leak. All of that information can help your consultant in order to more effectively direct their investigation and continue that monitoring. If you see the leakage problem occur every time it rains, I'd like to know that, because there's going to be a difference in the way that I assess the problem if it leaks every time it rains versus every other time it rains. So those are just some of my suggestions on tips and tricks and easy things that you can do before you go to your consultant to try to help them, which will in the long run help you by saving you time and money in identifying the source of your problem and identifying a potential solution.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Stephanie. As we can see, there's a pattern emerging, and from all three of our speakers, we are all trying to give practical tips, not ticks, they don't come out for a little while yet, practical tips, tricks, and tools for your boards of directors to try and save money at all levels. So we're just inviting all of our panelists to come back on screen, and we will unmute all of our panelists as well. I believe that'll probably be the most effective way to do this. And we can also invite Justin to turn on his video as our co-moderator, co-host for this particular portion of the session. Hi, Justin. So I see we did get a number of questions coming in, and so we'll try and tackle as many as we can. We've got about 7 minutes. If we go a couple of minutes over, hopefully there won't be too many challenges, but we will try our best to stick to the 6 o'clock time frame, because I know that dinner time for many is a sacred hour during this lockdown process. So
Great.
Justin, over to you.
First question is for Stephanie. Stephanie, what are you drinking?
I am drinking a lovely local Ottawa beer from Vimy Brewing Company. And if anyone is having anxiety like I am sitting in the LCBO lines, they are doing free contactless delivery to your front door.
Nice.
So it's a great local option.
Great to support local companies.
From the QA session, we got this question. In addition to walls, windows, roofs, presumably doors as part of the building envelope, I assume there may also be ground drainage issues. Are these part of the building envelope expertise, and would they qualify as well?
So there's a little bit of crossover and gray area between what I do with the building envelope and potentially the drainage around the foundation of your building. But that's definitely something that goes very hand in hand, and my colleagues in our civil group and I work very closely on that. And that's definitely an issue that your building envelope consultant could help you to identify if the drainage is part of the problem. And often, usually, if the drainage is a part of the problem, there's also usually an issue with the waterproofing, because there will be two kind of concerns there. One is that the water is not draining away from your building quickly enough. And then the second is that when the water is sitting there, it's finding a hole in your waterproofing or damp proofing system to make its way into your building.
Good stuff. One more here. What is the yuckiest stuff you've ever discovered in a wall?
So I'm always very careful to say that I'm not a biologist or a hazardous materials specialist. So we do see a lot of, especially where water's in play, we do see a lot of biological growth, as I like to call it. But probably the yuckiest thing I ever saw in a wall was a petrified rat one time when I opened it up. And that had nothing to do with leakage.
Shouldn't have asked.
It was,
I shouldn't have asked.
Yeah.
Yeah. Shelley, the next set of questions from the panel are for you. Shelley, what are you drinking?
I just pulled out, I just texted my daughter, said, I'm done, get me a beer. So she grabbed me a Michelob. Not exactly as exciting as Stephanie's, but hey, it's a beer.
That's what we get when we have to rely on our underage children, right?
Well, she's not underage, so
there we go.
That might be all I have left.
Shelley, we got a few questions here for you from the board.
Yeah.
Is there any experience and/or tips regarding direct hot water tanks? Are these devices more reliable or less claims noteworthy?
Is there any clarity on what direct means?
I assume it means not indirect. Or I suppose when comparing them to instantaneous water heaters, I guess. If they're not a tank, I suppose there's not a lot of water to soothe them.
Oh, I see
Yeah.
what you're saying. Like the
On
okay,
demand.
the
Yeah, direct
tankless
on
water
demand.
systems.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think I've seen a claim with one, to be super honest with you. So I'm going to go with, yeah, they're probably more reliable.
Good.
Because I guess they're not holding water, right?
Yeah.
This question's from me. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'll just say the only claim that I saw related to one of those was where the system itself had been hit by lightning. So indirectly, I hit the tank, obviously, but yeah, I haven't seen any as well.
Great. What's worse from a claims perspective, DIY plumbing or DIY electrical?
Well, DIY plumbing is probably more common. DIY electrical is way more dangerous.
From the board here, who calls in disaster mitigation companies for water damage in a unit? Can the board call? Is it the owner? Is the insurance company? Who should act first here?
Well, normally what happens is, I mean, the owner's the one that discovers the water. So, and normally, again, the owner calls their own insurance company because that's what they're trained to do. So there's no issue with that. As long as somebody acts, we can worry about it afterwards as to you know, who's paying for what, you know, is that a standard finish? Is that an upgrade? If a board, you know, gets notified and nobody's been called, the board can certainly call somebody. Like I said, in my experience, it's to react quickly. We can worry about it afterwards with regards to, you know, who's paying for what and you know, whose baseboard is this or whose piece of carpet is this. It's to get the water addressed ASAP.
And maybe we can ask Eileen to tack on to that, because Eileen, I saw you were nodding your head. So typically, I guess, would your advice be if the owner calls first, make sure they contact the corporation immediately as soon as possible, so you can dialogue with them?
Exactly. So like Shelley said, the homeowners typically is going to be the first person to notice water loss or the damage. And traditionally, they'll call their insurance company first, and they may send out a restoration company to mitigate that loss, or a plumber or something like that. If they contact us, we will, management or the board, management would definitely send out a contractor, either your superintendent, to investigate what's happening, or a company, a restoration company like Paul Davis or something like that, to make sure that the loss is mitigated, if there's any sort of cleanup. And then that's when we'll talk to the insurance company and adjusters like Shelley. Yeah.
Great.
Great. Eileen, moving into questions for you. What are you drinking?
Kind of boring. It's actually water.
Okay, well, you know, teach their own.
That's
I'm not
good.
going to force it upon
Hydration.
people.
Hydration is important.
Got a question here from the board. How widely applicable is the guideline referred to when submitting a claim when you're considering the claim value as an X of the deductible? Does this guideline apply to all line items in the insurance policy, or are there some where it might be a little bit worth it more, or is it a general rule?
Yeah, so the guidance that management and boards that we've received from our insurance companies and brokers is that, you know, when you're submitting a claim, especially now that we talked about the rising deductibles and premiums, is that you want to have at least a claim that's almost double, if not double, your deductible amount. So it's, you know, you want to speak to your insurance broker, obviously. They can help you determine if it's advantageous for you to put in a claim or not. They'd be the first one, definitely, that the board or management should reach out to. We've had that in the past. The broker will be very honest and say it might not be worth putting in a claim on this one. So speak with the broker about that. But kind of generally the rule of thumb is, you know, you want the loss at least to be roughly double your deductible amount.
Nancy, we have two quick last questions that came to the general file that maybe you can better answer. Nancy, what are you drinking?
Well, I'm going to quid pro quo. First, I'm going to say I'm drinking a lovely Pinot Grigio made by friends of the family several months ago that they brought over for a future party, and I'm opening it without them, so I'll have to apologize later. Secondly, one of our attendees are saying, Justin, what are you drinking?
Oh man, this is amazing. It's called Another Dimension. It's a dragon fruit, passion fruit, mango, pineapple, sour IPA from Half Hours on Earth Brewery. that made my wife's throat itch. So I got to finish it, and it is delightful. It is just something special.
Terrific.
But we have another question for you. Just generally right now, is the CAT or any other source from CCI to CAO available for dealing with disputes that are happening within a board of directors outside of record requests at this time?
So at this point in time, I'm not aware of any pro bono or voluntary organization that has a mechanism in place to assist mediating disputes at the board level. The best I could offer is to attend some courses, whether through CCI or some of the instruction, the online instruction through the CAO about alternative dispute resolution, about options that you have for dealing with difficult people, if that may be the case that you're dealing with. There's also some really great trained mediators who are on our CCI registry that you could take a look at and see whether they might be interested in coming into a couple of board meetings to see if they can assist you in managing styles of personality through conflict.
Great. Well, I think that's all the questions we got.
Actually, Justin, I saw a couple more coming in. So we've got one from Bruce. Did you want to do that one, or do you want me to jump in there?
Oh, you know what? I didn't even see it there. Go ahead.
Question for Shelley. How can you ensure that the valuation is correct for the cladding on your condo? Our low-rise townhouse condos are clad exclusively in 1-inch thick Western red cedar, yet appraisers continue to value the cladding as if it were pine, telling our board that they only have one classification for wood. So in other words, it's saying wood is wood, no difference between Western red cedar and pine. How do you ensure the valuation is correct?
Yeah, that's difficult because we're not usually directly involved in valuations, and even on like the damage side of things, a lot of the time they're computerized estimating systems, and that may be what the evaluator is dealing with. They just don't have the the various subcategories, if you will. I mean, what I can say, if there was ever a loss, I mean, the idea is, apple to apple. So we would source out, as long as that material is still available. If not, it would be, the next best thing from a quality perspective. But again, I'm not directly involved with evaluations, so I'm not sure really what the pushback would be on that, other than to make the insurer aware that when the evaluation is done, that there might be a bit of an understated value. Eileen, maybe you can step in. I don't know. Do you have any other thoughts, Eileen, other than what Shelley has offered?
No, not on that one, honestly. I mean, that's something to talk to your appraiser on. Yeah, unfortunately, I couldn't offer anything other than that.
Okay, so yeah, the recommendation really would be to speak to your broker and your appraiser to make sure they're talking to each other, to make sure that the valuation is representative of what you actually have on site as best possible. Obviously, you don't want to have your condo underinsured. It looks like we have one final question for me, I guess. Our condo is overdue for holding its AGM. Would it be legally acceptable to attempt holding it via Zoom or comparable app during the current physical distancing protocols? Well, the good news is there are a ton of blogs out there about this exact question, and we have the Order in Council that came down on Friday saying that you have a couple of different options. One, your AGMs are postponed. The requirement to have AGMs is postponed for 90 or 120 days following the lifting of the emergency order, depending on your exact circumstances. But if you do choose to hold your AGM in advance of that, you do have options now for electronic meetings, for both electronic voting and electronic attendance. So options are available. I urge you to look at the variety of blogs that have come out in just the recent days, and you should have lots of information at your fingertips to help you navigate that. And of course, definitely seek professional assistance when it gets time to actually putting the meeting in place. So I think we've gone through all of our questions. A few more may have popped up, but it looks like we're at 6:06, so I should start wrapping us up here. I just want to say a great big thank you to all of our fantastic panelists. I can't thank you enough for being here this evening. If you're not already a member of CCI, we would love to have you as a member. There's all sorts of benefits you can see: webinars, seminars, socials, directors training courses. And on that note, our director's course that we typically have in person twice a year, once in the spring and once in the fall, we are moving virtually this year. We're very excited. It's going to give us an opportunity to have a much wider reach for the entire Eastern Ontario region in one sitting as opposed to multiple sittings. The information is up on the screen, and we also encourage you to visit our website for more information. Also, every Tuesday, CCI Huronia, one of our other chapters, hosts its weekly COVID-19 seminar. That information is on our website and e-blasted. 2 weeks from now, we're going to be hosting another webinar: Mental Health, Interior Design, How to Be Fantastic During Your Self-Isolation. I won't give you any more tips than that. Stay tuned. It's going to be very exciting. So special guests, thank you again to our guests, to our planning committee, to Justin Tudor, to Mike Lewicki, to Shelley Seeby, our co-hosts, the fantastic AC staff, Melanie and Rachel, who we could not do this without, and of course, all of our members on the line and attendees. Until next time, and on behalf of the Board of Directors of CCI Eastern Ontario, please be safe, be kind, be patient, and stay home until we are directed otherwise. Please do your part to protect our essential workers that are putting their lives on the line to help all of us and those that are medically compromised. Let's all work together to continue to crush this curve. And from our CCI family to your family, wishing you a safe and healthy rest of your week. And cheers to all. Good night.